Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how I painted this orc based on the Rings of Power. So to start off with, I primed the model white to give us a light base coat to work from. And the first thing I'm going to do is come in with some dryad bark and I'm going to paint his staff. By painting this up now, it will save us from making a mess from the rest of the model later, because this stage will involve some dry brushing. So after a couple of coats of dryad bark, you've got a solid cover all over that staff. And next I'm coming in with some Nuln oil and I'm going to shade all over the dryad bark we just painted. This will find its way into any recesses and darken them up. And after the shade has dried, it's added some darkness to that staff. So next I'm coming in with some Baneblade brown, and with this I'm just going to dry brush over the wood in a light flicking motion, just to leave some paint on the most raised areas of the staff. And that is the staff painted. So now we can move on to painting the rest of the orc. So the first thing I'm going to do is come in with some Rawk flesh, and for this I'm painting all of his robes and any strapping that's on the model. So it's things here like this cloak and hood here. He's got some ropes around his legs and on the staff as well. Now this will take a couple of coats to get you a good solid base cover, but just work your way around, pick out any of the fabric or the strapping with a couple of coats of Rawk flesh. As you can see, he's got this strapping here on his leg, and he's got some on his arm, and there's some on the staff as well. So make sure you pick all of that out with some Rawk flesh. And after a couple of coats, we've got a solid base cover of Rawk flesh all over that fabric. Now I'm coming in with some Zandri dust, and I'm going to apply this to any of the rest of his clothing. So it's this bit here around his sort of chest, bit around his legs as well. Let's just be nice and neat. You don't want to get this over any of the Rawk flesh we just painted. Work your way around and pick out all of that clothing with a couple of coats of Zandri dust. After a couple of coats, built up a solid cover of Zandri dust. And so the next thing we're going to do is paint his boots and the tassel on his staff. So for this I'm coming in with some Dawnstone. I'm applying this here to the boots, and also he's got a tassel hanging down from the head of his staff as well. So make sure you catch all of those with a couple of coats of Dawnstone. Those details picked out, there's only a couple of base colours left to apply. So next I'm coming in with Ushabti bone, and I'm applying this to all of the bone that's on the model. So he's got this bone here on his leg that's acting like a shin guard, and of course the bone at the top of his staff as well. So make sure you catch all of those with a couple of coats of Ushabti bone. These are after 2 or 3 coats. We've got a real solid cover on that bone colour. So next I'm going to paint the strapping that's on his leg. So I'm coming in with some Steel Legion drab. And I'm just carefully picking out all of these straps that are coming along here. Obviously be nice and neat at this stage. You don't want to get this over any of the layers we've already painted. But just pick out those straps that are on his legs. And after that's been painted, there is just one final base colour to apply, and that will be his skin. So for this, I'm coming in with Celestra Grey. I'm going to paint all of his flesh. So this will take a couple of coats to get a good solid base cover, but just take your time, be nice and neat, and try and avoid getting this over any of the other colours we've painted already. Just pick out all of his skin with a couple of coats of Celestra Grey. And that's all of the base colours applied to the model. So the next step is we'll start shading him. So first of all, I'm coming in with some Agrax Earth Shade. I'm thinning this down with a little bit of water, just so it's not so heavy. I'm applying this all over the cloth, the bone, and any fabric as well. Try and avoid getting this over the skin, but just using a little bit of thinned down Agrax Earth Shade, shade all of that cloth and bone. Now with some known oil, I'm going to shade his skin. Also be nice and neat, don't want to get this over any of the fabric we've already shaded, but just work your way around and shade all of the skin with some known oil.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell.
With those shades now dried, you can see we've really added some definition to the model. So the first thing we're going to start highlighting is his cloak. So I'm coming in with some Rakarth flesh again. And I'm putting this on all the areas where the shade didn't settle. So in all of the recesses of these folds, we'll leave the Agrax Earth shade showing. But on all of the raised areas, come in with some Rakarth flesh to bring it back up to colour. So take your time with this step. Make sure you catch everywhere that the shade hasn't settled and leave that shade in all of the recesses. You don't have to worry too much about the strapping at this stage. Just make sure you catch this big cloak that's on him and highlight it back up to a brighter colour. As you can see here, the shade settled in those recesses, so I'm coming in on either side of them with some thinned down Rakarth flesh just to help bring it back up to the brighter colour. And with that step applied, you can see it started to brighten up that cloak quite a bit. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Rakarth flesh and Deepkin flesh. I'm going to put this sort of in the middle of where we just applied that Rawk flesh. So on all of these folds here, on the most raised areas, I'm going to put a chunky highlight of this mix, which will leave a little bit of the Rawk flesh showing and the shade in the recesses to really create that tonal difference on the cloak and work us up towards our final highlight. By having this nice and thin, you will allow the previous layer to show through, which will help build up that transition. So just take your time, work your way around, put a little bit of this 50-50 mix in the middle of all of our previous layers. Now with that applied, we've really started to build up that transition on his cloak. So now I'm coming in with some deep-kin flesh. I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight on just all of the most raised folds and pronounced creases. At this stage I'm also going to apply some of this to the strapping on the most raised areas just to highlight those up as well. So keep your lines nice and thin here. This is just an edge highlight on all of the most prominent details. And that's the cloak and the strapping highlighted. You can see it's really added a nice earthy colour to all that clothing. Next I'm coming in with some Ushabti bone, and for this I'm just going to do an edge highlight on this bit of clothing here, so around his chest and the bit hanging from his legs as well. Just catch the most raised parts of that with a thin line of Ushabti bone as an edge highlight. And with that applied, it's brought all of his clothing up to a nice light colour. So next I'm coming in with some Administratum Grey. For this I'm just going to highlight anything we painted with Dawnstone. So on his boots it's the most raised folds around here, just give them a thin edge highlight of Administratum Grey. And also the tassel on his staff as well. Catch any pronounced strings with a thin line of Administratum Grey as well. With that Dawnstone highlighted, he's really starting to come together now. There's only a couple of steps left to go. So next I'm coming back in with Ushabti bone, and I'm going to paint this over all of the bone areas. So much like with the fabric before, leave the shade in the recesses and pick out the raised areas with some Ushabti bone. Be nice and neat at this stage. You don't want to get this over anything that we've already painted and highlighted, but just work your way around, and on the raised areas of bone just put a little bit of Ushabti bone. And with that applied, you can see it's added some definition back to those bone areas. So next I come in with just a little bit of Screaming Skull. I'm just going to apply this as an edge highlight on the most raised parts of those bones. So any of the sharpest corners, most raised details where the light would catch, just put a thin line of Screaming Skull as an edge highlight. that's the bone highlighted. So now all that's left to do is his skin. So I'm coming back in with Celestra Grey first, and I'm putting this on all the areas where that shade didn't settle. So once again, leave that known oil showing in the recesses, but work your way around for the rest of it, and wherever the shade didn't settle, bring it back up to colour with a little bit of Celestra Grey. With that applied, you can see it's added some definition back to the skin. So the next step, I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey and Deepkin Flesh as a 50-50 mix, and applying this in the middle of those previous steps. So wherever we just applied some Celestra Grey, come in and in the middle of those areas, apply a little bit of this 50-50 mix. This will help bring up the transition to those lighter areas where the light would catch, and add some more tone to the skin of the model. And with that applied, you can see we really are starting to build up those transitions towards the highlight of the skin. So now I'm coming in with just some pure Deepkin Flesh and picking out the raised areas again with another layer of this. So putting this in the middle of the previous step to really push that transition up to a nice bright highlight on the skin. Be really nice and careful at this stage. Make sure you just get this where you want on the most upward facing and largest areas, but just apply a thin coat of Deepkin Flesh in the middle of the previous steps to push it up one more brightness. And with that applied, there's just one more highlight we're going to do on the skin. So for this, I'm going to come in with some Pallid Witch Flesh, and I'm just basically doing an edge highlight on all of the most raised and pronounced details. So it's things here like the tip of his nose, his eyebrows, his sort of pronounced cheekbones, his bottom lips, and any really pronounced features on the rest of him. Just give them an edge highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh to make them stand out. And that is the skin highlighted. So now the only thing left to do on this orc is to paint in his eyes. So for this, I'm coming in with some Abaddon Black. I'm just going to sink this into the recess of his eye socket. It'd be really neat at this stage. You don't want to get this over any of the skin. And then come in with a little bit of White Scar and add that as a line in the middle of the black that we just applied. And then finally, with some Abaddon Black again, I do a vertical line in the middle of that white, which will act like a pupil. And there is a Rings of Power orc painted up. Please let me know in the comments what you think of the Rings of Power orcs. I personally really like the look of them. But thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe, and happy painting.